There's a feud going on between Elon Musk and Mark Cuban. Billionaire Bill Ackman did this long post about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and Elon Musk says that DEI is just another word for racism. Shame on anyone who uses it. Elon Musk says that discrimination on the basis of race, which DEI does, is literally the definition of racism. Mark Cuban does not like what Elon is saying. Let me help you out and give you my thoughts on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Number one, diversity. Good businesses look where others don't to find the employees that will put your business in the best possible position to succeed. You may not agree, but I take it as a given that there are people of various races, ethnicities, orientation, etc. that are regularly excluded from hiring consideration. By extending our hiring search to include them, we can find people that are more qualified. The loss of DEI phobic companies is my gain. We live in a country with very diverse demographics. In this era where trust of businesses can be hard to come by, people tend to connect more easily to people who are like them. Having a workforce that is diverse and representative of your stakeholders is good for business. People tend to connect more easily to people who are like them. Elon bad? Yes, Elon bad. Oh, Elon so bad. A connection has been born. Equity. Treating people equally does not mean treating them the same. I made the mistake for a lot of years thinking it did. Equity is a core principle of business. Put your employees in a position to succeed. Recognize their differences and play to their strengths wherever possible. It is not a hard concept, but it is not easy to implement. Most workforces don't have the depth of management to do this well. When it's not done well, it can create tension and resentment. Number three, inclusion. One of my favorite sayings is that great employees reduce the stress of those around them. Great companies create environments that reduce unnecessary stress of their employees. I'm not talking about hitting quota or getting the product out the door stress. He's not talking about quota. So he's not talking about inclusion, but he says he's talking about inclusion, which in turn increases productivity. This is what inclusion is all about. Making all employees, no matter who they are or how they see themselves, feel comfortable in their environment and able to do their jobs. Again, it's not easy. It makes sense what he's saying, but how is that inclusion? In the sense that we are hearing about it politically. Number four, why DEI is like healthcare. One of the lessons I've learned in healthcare is that most CEOs don't know and don't really want to know where their healthcare benefit dollars are going. In their minds, it's not part of the core competency of their business. As a result, they waste a lot of money on less than quality care for their employees. And more often than not, it's their sickest and lowest paid employees that subsidize the rebates and deductibles. Sicker employees have to pay up to their deductible, healthy don't. So what does this have to do with DEI? Like healthcare, DEI is not seen as a core competency in most companies. It's just a huge expense. Intellectually, they see the benefit of DEI, but they don't have time to focus on it. So it turns into a checkbox that they hope they don't have to deal with beyond having HR do a report to the board and legal tells them they are covered. When anything that impacts all of your employees is pretty much a checklist item to the CEO, there is a good chance that it's not going to work well, and you are going to have employees who are not comfortable for a lot of different reasons, which in turn creates resentment towards DEI policies and training, which in turn makes it harder on the managers trying to implement it. When companies do DEI well, you see a well-run, successful company. If you don't think there is a need for DEI and it doesn't create a competitive advantage for your company, just look at the exposed replies quotes below. These are the same people that work for you or are your coworkers. Everyone is entitled to their point of view, but these same feelings, even if they are not said out loud, are heard loud and clear at work. Elon replies to Mark Cuban and says, cool, so when should we expect to see a short, white Asian woman on the Mavericks team? Look at all of this inclusion here. You know, not everything in life is black and white. Some things are mostly just black. Obviously, Mark Cuban looks for players that are the best players, which usually means they are going to be tall. Mark actually responded to Elon with this post. So Mark Cuban says he may draft this woman who is short, obviously, right? She's only taller than 99.35% of all Americans. How considerate of Mark to include short people on his team. Elon says Mark Cuban is desperately trying to signal his virtue, but his hypocrisy convinces no one. You know, maybe about 10 years ago, I used to like Mark Cuban a lot. In terms of business, I think he's pretty smart. But look at this right here. He says, there was a question. So you're okay with Asian students being discriminated against during college admissions? I think that's backwards personally, and that we should judge people as individuals rather than on group identity. To me, that makes sense. Mark even says, you seem to believe that the ultimate goal of a university is to have the right admission policy. I wouldn't send my kids to a school that makes that their goal. So no answer at all. He didn't answer it. Well, he did respond to Elon with an LOL. Mark actually responded to this comment here. Do the Dallas Mavericks reflect the demographics of America as a whole? Which to me, when someone says inclusion, diversity, equity, that's what it means. You include everyone exactly proportionally. But Mark says if you were trying to make a stupid comment, you nailed it. First, as an organization as a whole, yes, we do. More importantly, if you understand the value of DEI, it's not in checklists and quotas, it's in understanding how to best compete as a company. We hire the people who put us in the best position to succeed. In other words, some jobs are too important to apply the actual diversity, equity, inclusion principles. Just to be very clear, I think it makes perfect sense to have only tall people on your team because that's how you win. If you don't do that, then you lose. And Mark obviously knows that, but he just won't say it out loud. Mark talks about DEI, which basically does not hire based on merit, but the definitions that he's using to describe DEI are merit-based, which to me, these two don't go together. My parents grew up in the Soviet Union, actually, and yeah. It was incredibly diverse, and everyone was included in the poverty. Everyone was equal. Everyone was equally poor. No one had money. It's a bit like Cuba, right? Let's get back to the original post where this whole feud between Elon and Mark Cuban started. It started from this post by billionaire Bill Ackman. In light of today's news, I thought I would try to take a step back and provide perspective on what this is really all about. I first became concerned about Harvard when 34 Harvard student organizations early on the morning of October 8th, before Israel had taken any military actions in Gaza, came out publicly in support of Hamas, a globally recognized terrorist organization, holding Israel solely responsible for Hamas' barbaric and heinous acts. How could this be? I wondered. When I saw President Gay's initial statement about the massacre, it provided more context for the student group's statement of support for terrorism. The protest began as pro-Palestine and then became anti-Israel. Shortly thereafter, anti-Semitism exploded on campus as protesters who violated Harvard's own codes of conduct were emboldened by the lack of enforcement of Harvard's rules and kept testing the limits on how aggressive, intimidating, and disruptive they could be to Jewish and Israeli students, and the student body at large. Sadly, anti-Semitism remains a simmering source of hate even at our best universities among a subset of students. A few weeks later, I went up to campus to see things with my own eyes and listen and learn from students and faculty. I met with 15 or so members of the faculty and a few hundred students in small and large settings, and a clearer picture began to emerge. I ultimately concluded that anti-Semitism was not the core of the problem. It was simply a troubling warning sign. It was the canary in the coal mine, despite how destructive it was in impacting student life and learning on campus. I came to learn that the root cause of anti-Semitism at Harvard was an ideology that had been promulgated on campus, an oppressor/oppressed framework that provided the intellectual bulwark behind the protests, helping to generate anti-Israel and anti-Jewish hate speech and harassment. Then I did more research. The more I learned, the more concerned I became, and the more ignorant I realized I had been about diversity, equity, inclusion, a powerful movement that has not only pervaded Harvard, but the educational system at large. I came to understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion was not what I had naively thought these words meant. I have always believed that diversity is an important feature of a successful organization, but by diversity, I mean diversity in its broadest form. Diversity of viewpoints, politics, ethnicity, race, age, religion, experience, socioeconomic background, sexual identity, gender, one's upbringing, and more. That makes sense. What I learned, however, was that DEI was not about diversity in its purest form, but rather DEI was a political advocacy movement on behalf of certain groups that are deemed oppressed under DEI's own methodology. Under DEI, one's degree of oppression is determined based upon where one resides on a so-called intersectional pyramid of oppression where whites, Jews, and Asians are deemed oppressors, and a subset of people of color, LGBTQ, the more letters you add, I guess the more oppressed, and or women are deemed to be oppressed. Under this ideology, which is the philosophical underpinning of DEI as advanced by Ibram X. Kendi and others, one is either an anti-racist or a racist. There is no such thing as being not racist. Under DEI's ideology, any policy program, educational system, economic system, grading system, admission policy, and even climate change due to its disparate impact on geographies and the people that live there, etc., that leads to unequal outcomes among people of different skin colors is deemed racist. As a result, according to DEI, capitalism is racist. Advanced placement exams are racist. IQ tests are racist. Corporations are racist. Or in other words, any merit-based program, system, or organization which has or generates outcomes for different races that are at variance with the proportion these different races represent in the population at large is by definition racist under DEI's ideology. So what do we do about certain people not being in the NBA? Mark Cuban then is racist based on this ideology. The ideology that he's pushing makes him a racist, but he's defending that ideology. Very interesting. In order to be deemed anti-racist, one must personally take action to reverse any unequal outcomes in society. The DEI movement, which has permeated many universities, corporations, and state, local and federal governments, is designed to be the anti-racist engine to transform society from its currently structurally racist state to an anti-racist one, where everyone is equally poor. Just like everyone was in Soviet Union, where all of my family grew up. It was terrible. After the death of George Floyd, the already burgeoning DEI movement took off without any real challenge to its problematic ideology. Why, you might ask? Was there so little pushback? The answer is that anyone who dared to raise a question which challenged DEI was deemed racist, a label which could severely impact one's employment, social status, reputation, and more. Being called a racist got people canceled. So those concerned about DEI and its societal and legal implications had no choice but to keep quiet in this new climate of fear. The techniques that DEI has used to squelch the opposition are found in the Red Scares and McCarthyism of decades past. If you challenge DEI, justice will be swift, and you may find yourself unemployed, shunned by colleagues, canceled, and or you will otherwise put your career and acceptance in society at risk. The DEI movement has also taken control of speech. Certain speech is no longer permitted. So-called microaggressions are treated like hate speech. Trigger warnings are required to protect students. Safe spaces are necessary to protect students from the trauma inflicted by words that are challenging to the students' newly acquired worldviews. Campus speakers and faculty with unapproved views are shouted down, shunned, and canceled. You know, when I went to school, I think the whole school actually was a safe space. It was a safe space from being an idiot. If you were being an idiot, someone was gonna punch you in the face. These speech codes have led to self-censorship by students and faculty of views privately held but no longer shared. There is no commitment to free expression at Harvard other than for DEI-approved views. This has led to the quashing of conservative and other viewpoints from the Harvard campus and faculty, and contributed to Harvard's having the lowest free speech ranking of 248 universities assessed by the Foundation of Individual Rights and Expression. When one examines DEI and its ideological heritage, it does not take long to understand that the movement is inherently inconsistent with the basic American values. Our country, since its founding, has been about creating and building a democracy with equality of opportunity for all. I am all for that. Equal opportunity for all, not equality of outcome. Millions of people have left behind socialism and communism to come to America to start again, as they have seen the destruction leveled by an equality of outcome society. Oh, yeah, my whole family felt that. I come from absolutely no money, zero. My family comes from destruction, basically. This is a pretty bad place to live. The E for equity in DEI is about equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity. DEI is racist because reverse racism is racism, even if it is against white people. And it is remarkable that I even need to point this out. Racism against white people has become considered acceptable by many not to be racism. Or alternatively, it is deemed acceptable racism. While this is, of course, absurd, it has become the prevailing view in many universities around the country. You can say things about white people today in universities and business or otherwise that if you switch the word white to black, the consequences to you would be costly and severe. To state what should otherwise be self-evident, whether or not a statement is racist, should not depend upon whether the target of the racism is a group who currently represents a majority or minority of the country, or those who have a lighter or darker skin color. Racism against whites is as reprehensible as it is against groups with darker skin colors. Martin Luther King's most famous words are instructive. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. But here we are in 2024 being asked, and in some cases required, to use skin color to affect outcomes in admissions, recently deemed illegal by the Supreme Court. In business, likely illegal, yet it happens nonetheless. And in government, also, I believe in most cases to be illegal, except apparently in government contracting, rather than the content of one's character. As such, a meritocracy is an anathema to the DEI movement. DEI is inherently a racist and illegal movement in its implementation, even if it purports to work on behalf of the so-called oppressed. The post goes on for another, probably if I read till the end, it would probably be another 15 or 20 minutes. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but yeah, you got the gist of it. Anyway, I should probably not get too deep into these subjects because, like Bill Ackman pointed out, if you talk about these things, you are going to get attacked, canceled. They will make up stories about you that are completely not true. They will viciously attack you until you become completely irrelevant and completely canceled, or until you give up. And if you don't give up, then they just never stop. And I recognize that if I dig into these subjects regularly, then I would be at risk of some severe attacks too, which is where I think having Patreon supporters is really important. So for all of you who do support me on Patreon, I appreciate that so very, very much, because to me it shows that if I do get canceled, people actually care. I personally would much rather not get into these really sensitive, touchy subjects, but it's really difficult to do that when people are being such hypocrites in the open. I mean, basketball teams are so diverse in hypocrisy of not including short people. Anyway, if you find stories like this one important, informative, relevant, if you'd like me to do more of these, if you are financially doing all right, if you support me on Patreon, I would really appreciate that, and it will be a clear signal to me that, yeah, people actually care about this stuff. But if you are not doing financially well, please don't support me on Patreon. I don't need your money. I'm only trying to figure out, do you guys care about stories like this? And if you do, I would be happy to do a lot more of them. But then I put myself, there's a big risk in doing stories like this. And that's one reason why I'm gonna be doing more funny content. I have a whole different channel for that, because if I do a lot more stories like this, I don't want to be known as the guy that covers stories like this. I want to be known as, oh, he's that funny guy that sometimes talks about these other things. That makes me much harder to cancel.